It is official. James Franklin is set to be Virginia Tech's next head coach. And you better believe that Franklin is going to come after every player that's still on this Penn State roster.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, breaking news here on a Monday. James Franklin is headed to Virginia Tech. Welcome into a live impromptu Locked On Nittany Lions. My name is Seyko. I am your host of the show as always. And thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for making Locked On Nittany Lions a part of your daily routine. Plenty to cover because recruiting just became annoying. James Franklin, whether it's out of spite or probably because it's out of spite, is going to make it his job to make recruiting as difficult as possible for the Nittany Lions going forward. But what does it mean in terms of the transfer portal? Just how is it going to impact Penn State's roster for the next year, next couple of years, next 5 to 10 years? Because James Franklin at Virginia Tech, it's a great landing spot for him, in my opinion. It is a great landing spot. I mean, it's a great match for both Virginia Tech and James Franklin. But how does it impact the Nittany Lions? Because two things can be true. There's the people that are saying that Penn State made the biggest mistake in the world. This is going to be a massive issue for them. And the people that say that Virginia Tech is now going to become an issue for the Nittany Lions, that it's the end all be all. But it's not quite to that extent. Will this be annoying? Yes. Will this be inconvenient? Yes. Because Penn State does have a number of players that you would like to retain, right? And a part of this conversation is going to be naming those players. I think of Tony Rojas, who's from Virginia. I think of Amari Campbell. So your two starting linebackers for next season, supposedly, is going potentially to follow James Franklin. Because Franklin's going to make it his job to go after this roster. Everybody that's on it. Starters, backups, you name it. And that's why he's taking this job. But it is also Penn State and Virginia Tech. Big Ten versus ACC. The largest living alumni network versus, what Virginia Tech has. Virginia Tech is a reputable institution, but it is still in the ACC. So they will be able to compete with Penn State to an extent. But it's only going to take away a little bit, right? But James Franklin's is a really good recruiter. I would watch for Rojas. I would watch for Campbell. I would watch for anybody, really, because that is the kind of coach that James Franklin was, putting relationships above all else in recruiting. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's how he operated, is that it was about him. It was about what he was as a head coach. It was always commit to me. It wasn't commit to Penn State. And that was mostly because he wanted players to not commit to assistant coaches. But James Franklin has strong relationships with a lot of these players. Could I see this entire roster following James Franklin to Virginia Tech? Potentially, especially players where it benefits them. If they start right away, if they move closer to home, absolutely. But to say that, well, Penn State, that's going to be, no, it's not going to be the end for Penn State. I also want to throw out this, because James Franklin and Virginia Tech only happens because no other schools in the SEC wanted James Franklin. There were no other opportunities. You could even add Florida State in there, whether it was because they had a current head coach or because there wasn't mutual interest. I had a source tell me that James Franklin had interviewed for the Auburn head coaching job. So I think he was using either Virginia Tech as leverage or to make sure that he could maximize his resources there, while at the same time, can I get back into the SEC, or can I wait for a Big Ten job to open where I know I'm going to be best suited? I think of Michigan State. They never moved on from Jonathan Smith. There were always rumors swirling about how Mike Norvell was going to leave Florida State. And it just never leave, not by his own accord. He was going to get fired. And it never happened. So I still stand by the fact that I think James Franklin is settling here. I don't think that Virginia Tech was his first choice. but he's going to make the most of it. Okay. I mean, as he should. This job is giving him what he asked for the most part, right? Within reason. I don't know that they're giving him a blank check, but this is a massive, right? Virginia Tech wants Franklin. He elevates them to the top of the ACC and puts them right in the conversation with Miami of Florida and Clemson instantaneously. It is a 3-team race for the ACC every single year. Penn State, like I said, it's going to be inconvenient. It's going to be annoying, especially if you don't get a coach with Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Pennsylvania ties, right? So Eli Drinkwitz, that makes his job harder if he happens to get the job. Or is it Brent Key? Or is it Jeff Brohm? But Penn State is still Penn State as the institution. Virginia Tech trying to compete with them on a day-to-day basis is going to be difficult as it is, institution versus institution, and to each their own. Some people might find Blacksburg, Virginia more appealing than State College, Pennsylvania, and vice versa. I really don't think the two, they're both college towns respective to their state. It's different when you're going up against USC in Los Angeles, Miami, Florida, the Hurricanes, right? Austin, Texas. That is difficult to do. But to say, oh, well, Blacksburg's better than State College is better than Blacksburg, to each their own. What it really comes down to is the support that you have, the NIL, the conference battles, all of that stuff. That matters in the scheme of things. But if you're thinking short term, yeah, James Franklin's going to be absolutely motivated. I think he has an axe to grind because he wants to stick it to Penn State. Penn State fired him abruptly in the middle of the season after winning over 100 games. He's going to take that absolutely personal. But because of the transfer portal, it's not the end-all be-all. Penn State's going to be able to easily recover. If this was a situation pre-NIL, transfer portal era, you're probably, if you're Penn State, you're probably worried about this move. Because then it makes all of that much more difficult. But recruiting is only one aspect now. And it's not the biggest aspect at the end of the day. The transfer portal can be very good to you if you know how to use it, if you know how to manage it. Look at Texas Tech. Look at Indiana. A lot of teams that all of a sudden become really good overnight because they knew how to maximize the transfer portal. And they're able to combine both sides of it. You still want to recruit, but it's not the ultimate goal anymore in college football. Virginia Tech, massive move. If I'm Maryland, if I'm Virginia, if I'm North Carolina and Bill Belichick, I am worried. I do not like this move whatsoever. James Franklin is going to be a massive headache, more so for all of those schools than he is for Penn State, especially because, again, they're not in the same conference. Penn State doesn't play Virginia Tech on a weekly, on a season-by-season basis. They're not rivals. I know Penn State's unrivaled, right? All that stuff. But in the short term, Virginia Tech's still in proximity to Penn State. So like I said, you do have to worry about some of those key players, and we'll name them. We'll talk about the key players. More importantly, coaches. Okay, what coaches would follow James Franklin to from Penn State to Virginia Tech? That's going to be extremely important because the Nittany Lions, you do want to retain at least some sort of a base. So with Terry Smith, with Ty Howell, Deion Barnes, Dan Connor, quality assistant coaches that can help James Franklin get a fresh start at Virginia Tech and help the next coach at Penn State. Well, we're going to discuss that. Also talk to all of you in the live chat here on this live show to react to James Franklin heading to Virginia Tech. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot and an even bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets. That's right, $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And you can use that on anything: NBA, NFL, college football. Yes, lines for Penn State versus Nebraska are available. Penn State is a pretty decent favorite. 9.5 points on the spread. The total is set at 44.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com and the FanDuel app. So head to FanDuel, and remember, new customers can get $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so Penn State and why the roster and why the assistant coaches could all potentially follow James Franklin, not 100%, but definitely a decent amount, a strong amount. We don't know who Penn State's head coach is. So the guy who's in charge isn't going to be able to build relationships while James Franklin is working the phones. He is going to be making phone calls, whether that's Terry Smith, whether that's any of the assistants that I name. What about somebody like Anthony Poindexter? Now, it's interesting because Anthony Poindexter, he's from Virginia, but the University of Virginia, UVA is his alma mater. Would he take an assistant coaching job at Virginia Tech? But what about Trace McSorley? Trace McSorley's from the state of Virginia. I'm just thinking of Penn State, Penn State people that you would like to keep around that could potentially follow Franklin to VT. I'd be more concerned about the roster. And depending on who you ask, some people might say, good riddance. I want all of them gone because this was a losing season. If this roster was so great, why didn't they win? You might be right to say that. There are some capable players, though, again, that I would not be ready to move on from. Tony Rojas and Amari Campbell immediately. That's a starting linebacker duo. That was one of the better ones in the Big Ten. I would say probably after Ohio State, probably the best linebacker duo when they were both healthy. They're both from Virginia. I easily could see them ending up at Virginia Tech. Not ideal. Then what about along the defensive line? I think of Chaz Coleman in the secondary. I think of Darius Dixon, guys with tons of upside. I've compared Chaz Coleman to Abdul Carter before. Darius Dixon starting these past couple of games or certainly had a lot of playing time against both Indiana and Michigan State and held his own as a true freshman. Does he follow James Franklin to go to Virginia Tech at the end of the day? Maybe, maybe not. Dixon is from the state of California. So there is a lot at play here, but I don't think anybody is necessarily safe because it's all going to be dependent on what is Terry Smith doing? Is he on the next staff? Is he the head coach? Is he still in consideration? He's done admirably well. I would give him an equal chance to interview. I'm not saying that he's Penn State's top choice or their best choice, but I think he's made himself considerably a choice. There are a lot of people that would probably stay to play for Terry Smith and what this coaching staff would look like. Marcus Hagans, Andy Kotelnicki, they're probably all going to go in a different direction. The names that you need to focus on the most, Terry Smith, Ty Howell, Jim Knowles. Does Jim Knowles stay at Penn State? And that's not even a Virginia Tech thing. That is does he stay at Penn State? Does Penn State want to keep him with the staff? You want to keep those Penn State guys around because, well, obviously they're Penn State guys. Their allegiance is partially to the university. They're alums. They appreciate it for what it's worth. And to deviate from that, I do think to an extent that James Franklin, I hope that he appreciates Virginia Tech for what it is, because I think at the end of the day, whether that was because the fan base had soured, right? The fan base booed James Franklin out of town. So I can get when I say that he has an axe to grind, I understand why. But how did the fan base just turn so sour against him? James Franklin didn't even put out a statement saying, I'm grateful for my time. Just about every coach that got fired did. Brian Kelly even put out a statement for LSU. Okay, Brian Kelly to LSU fans. James Franklin never did that for Penn State, even though he was there for 12 seasons. There's part of me that believes that, and it's not to criticize him extensively, but I do feel like James Franklin thought that he did more for the university than the university did for him. That the university was where it was because of him solely. And I think that's why tensions got where they were, because as the fan base, you could sense that. So my hope is that doesn't happen at Virginia Tech. I would like them to do well. I would like to see them at the top of the ACC. Go head to head with Dabo Swinney. Make Mario Cristobal's job at Miami of Florida more difficult. Not too difficult that it inconveniences Penn State, right? But that's how I look at this. Is it will impact Penn State to an extent, but if I'm those other schools, I am worried, right? Bill Belichick in North Carolina, that's a big deal. Tony Elliott at the University of Virginia, that's a big deal for them. But Penn State it goes back to my first point at the beginning of the show, that Penn State made this move for a reason. They didn't do this on a whim. A lot of tensions had boiled over. The rumors that had been confirmed by multiple sources that James Franklin wanted a contract extension. Pat Kraft wasn't ready to give it to him. And so Franklin went to the superiors to get that contract extension. He went over his boss's head. Allegedly, right? I'm going to say that, but there are other people that have gone on the record to say this is true. So this is why we are where we are, because it wasn't just about, oh, James Franklin doesn't win enough or doesn't win the big game. Certainly that was an element of it. But Penn State and James Franklin, the relationship had run its course. It was never going to work out. So Penn State had to go in a different direction for itself. Both parties might win at the end of the day, might succeed. Penn State might be in a better situation because of this move, and James Franklin might be in a better situation because of this move. One thing that I do, again, want to consider in the scheme of things, I'm eager to see this contract. And speaking of contract terms, Penn State negotiating a buyout from $50 million down to $9 million is huge for obvious reasons. You don't have to shell out $50 million to Franklin. You only have to pay him a portion of that, a fraction of that. What does Franklin's deal look like at Virginia Tech? Because again, it goes back to, I am not entirely sold on the idea that Franklin views Virginia Tech as a 5 to 10 to 15. Is this his final destination? Is this where he retires? He was interviewing for SEC jobs. He was waiting for other places to open up. Since he was told no, that's why he came back to Virginia Tech and said, again, Virginia Tech wanted Franklin, and I don't blame them for that. But Franklin didn't just automatically want VT. He wanted conditions. He wanted to see if something was better out there. And is that Jimmy Sexton, his agent, doing his job? Okay, I won't speak for both of them. Maybe Sexton's just doing his job, and Franklin, why he's at VT, that ends up being the way that it is. So in 3 years, if Virginia Tech is succeeding, does the SEC start calling? Or does another Big Ten job open up where Franklin, might be interested in moving on? Because I still think he sees himself as a Power 2 head coach. And of all the conferences right now that are kind of fighting for legitimacy, the SEC and the Big Ten are at the top. The Big 12 is a little more stable. And then there's the ACC. I just know that the ACC, again, there's always, you don't see, I guess to an extent because Utah's always rumored to jump conferences, but the other 17 schools or so, you don't see that issue happening. In the ACC, it's Florida State and Clemson are ready to leave, right? There's always rumors about them. Are they going to join the Big Ten? Are they going to join the Big 12? And then what does that do for the ACC as a whole? Because then that impacts everybody. That impacts Virginia Tech. So just that's what I'm trying to point out, is it's not so much a Virginia Tech thing. It's kind of an ACC thing where I believe that Franklin views himself as an SEC or a Big Ten head coach at the end of the day. But that's my opinion. Okay. Maybe it works out. Maybe they win a ton of ACC titles and he finishes and ends his tenure in a decade, but it's to be determined, right? I know in the short term that Franklin's going to recruit Pennsylvania. He's going to go after this current roster aggressively. He's going to try to end. I didn't even mention guys on the offense. I mentioned a lot of guys on the defense because I think those are impact starters going into next season. There is upside, right? Grunkemeyer could follow Franklin to Virginia Tech, especially if a new coach brings in a new QB. Are you going to go into a quarterback battle Or are you going to go and follow your coach and be the instant starter? I could see Grunkemeyer going to Virginia Tech. I could see Kobe Howard potentially going to Virginia Tech. Some offensive linemen that would have stepped up in a big way. Because do you take Phil Troutwine with you? Phil Troutwine might go to Virginia Tech, for example. That's another assistant that, and again, some Penn State fans will be like, good riddance. Don't care. Let him go. But they are really good recruiters. And that's what James Franklin is known for. Recruiting, and the same with the staff across the board. They could recruit. But game day, that's what you're sacrificing potentially. So as we wrap up this conversation, we should fully bring it back to Penn State and talk about what direction the Nittany Lions are going in, because it seems like nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going on. Is it Eli Drinkwitz? Is it Jeff Brohm? Is it Brent Key? Is it somebody that we haven't even mentioned whatsoever when it comes to this head coaching search? Well, we'll discuss it coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. We all love college football. College football is what is the most exciting sport out there. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why you got to use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best price with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Game Time in just a couple of taps and you'll see amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. And if you've never used Game Time before, one of the great features about Game Time is you can see your point of view ahead of time from your selected seats. So if you've never been to a stadium, you've never been to a venue, you can see your point of view ahead of time so you're not second guessing yourself. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, one final segment here on the live show to bring it all together. I'll check in on the live chat as well as we wrap up. But Penn State's coaching search, what direction it's headed in, I'm not quite sure. Eli Drinkwitz seems to be the leading candidate, so to speak. At least that's what we presume. That's what I've had a source tell me. That's what other outlets are saying as well, that, hey, it seems like Penn State's going to go with Drinkwitz. Okay. That means, do you get Bo Prabula back? And then Grunkemeyer's definitely on the transfer portal if that's the case. But the disadvantage that Penn State has here is a lot of the unknown. You don't know what direction you're headed in. And that, in the short term, is going to allow James Franklin to have a lot more leverage here. Because if players can't meet with the new head coach, if they can't have those conversations of what their outlook is at Penn State, they're going to go elsewhere. It doesn't even have to be Virginia Tech. It's going to be somewhere else. Does Penn State need to make a move sooner rather than later? Potentially. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish here. Did Penn State change its expectations with this coaching search? You don't get Mike Elko, who was your whale target. You were swinging for the fences. That was one of them. Kalen DeBoer is another one. And I'm not here to say that these are likely, but they're worth taking a swing. You absolutely, because you fired your coach that got you to 10-2 on a pretty consistent basis. You need to reset expectations. You don't want to settle. You don't make this move kind of lightly, but I don't think Pat Kraft makes this decision lightly. I don't think Pat Kraft makes this decision if he didn't have a name in mind, if he didn't have somebody that was genuinely interested in being Penn State's next head coach that was at least comparable. Eli Drinkwitz is a good coach. Brent Key, Jeff Brohm. I've given my 2 cents on all of them. Drinkwitz again, but does he elevate the program? I would like to think that, okay, optimistically, any of them can if you give them the right resources to bridge, right? Penn State's supposed to elevate you. And the reason we're here, aside from some of the rumors and the tensions and everything else, James Franklin did get a lot of what he wanted at Penn State. He got the facilities built, and that's going to help a new head coach. He got the money. He got the coordinators. Okay, so for the longest time, I was willing to side with that argument. It's now an excuse, but at one time it was legitimate. I don't have the money to go get my coordinators. I'm settling at coordinator. Okay, you were right. But then you hand-selected Andy Kotelnicki. You hand-selected Manny Diaz, Tom Allen, Jim Knowles. And you never elevated. You stayed the same or got worse. It was acceptable, and it may, maybe it shouldn't have been. But I'm willing to say it was acceptable to lose to Oregon because you still had the rest of the season in front of you. You could have gone 10-2 and made the playoff with this team. It was the fact that this spiraled out of control, that you retained all of your roster. You got Drew back. You got Singleton and Allen both back. This entire offensive line. Key defensive players like Denai Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant, Zachy Wheatley. All those guys could have went to the NFL. But you spent every ounce of NIL to retain them. And it got worse. That is why we are where we are. Franklin needs to reestablish his credibility, and I think he will win and succeed at Virginia Tech. Penn State, if you give those same resources, if you give a $3 million defensive coordinator hire to somebody else, if you give an NIL war chest to somebody else, what are they going to do with it? It was all those things combined. So the direction that Penn State is going in is to be determined. They could be better. They could be worse. The thing that I want to finish, the note that I want to finish on is that I'm all for it. I know that might sound like me complaining about, you're complaining about 10-2 seasons every year. Yeah, I am a little bit, because you knew how this movie was going to end year in and year out. If you know the ending to the movie, it stinks. It's not fun watching. Okay, we beat Maryland. We beat West Virginia. We beat Auburn at a low point in the SEC. You win, right? You win those out of conference, those non-conference matchups. You beat all the opponents that you're supposed to. But every time you get to Ohio State, Michigan when they're peaking, Oregon, you know the result and how it's going to end. Notre Dame in the playoff. Every time it is a big game, you were set up to lose. And that was both on and off the field. It started to turn that way in recruiting. It started to turn that way in the transfer portal. The second there was a highly contentious battle in some regard, you knew that Penn State was going to lose. If Notre Dame got in the mix for a recruiting battle, swept this past cycle, 4 or 5 impact prospects, all to Notre Dame. Good luck trying to out-recruit Ohio State. Michigan. It was every single school that was on a level playing field or slightly above. I'm glad that Penn State can out-recruit North Carolina. Virginia Tech, see, they were able to out-recruit, right? Virginia Tech. We'll see if that changes. But if there was a mutual recruit that Penn State and Maryland wanted, guess who Penn State was getting? That mutual recruit. But when it came to those big moments, those big games, Penn State was always on the losing side. So I'm eager to see, because I'm eager to see the next 5 to 10 years from Penn State's perspective, because you now have new coaches, for better or for worse. You're getting new coaches, a new direction, and new enemies. This is a new type of battlefield in college football for this part. SEC is the SEC, but in the Big Ten and the ACC, I like that there's some newness here. There's a fresh start. The same movie got repetitive. I wish James Franklin well, and I hope that the next Penn State coach can succeed, whomever that is. But right now, it's to be determined. And I think Pat Kraft's done a fairly good job that, because the James Franklin, if you looked at the Virginia Tech message boards, that was all the reporting, good. I give a lot of credibility to them. They were on top of that, whether it was the legitimate reporters or the people that were anonymous on the message boards. They were all over the James Franklin of Virginia Tech intel. So kudos to them. All right, we'll check in on the comments section briefly here as I do. So I'll go through my show, I'll go through my agenda, and then talk to all of you in the comments section. We know that he's going to be poaching both players and future recruits. Well, he's going to go up against Penn State, but I would look at the current roster, focus there. And then in terms of recruits, well, most of them already have picked their other destinations. There's still some mutual recruits right now. There's still some verbal commitments, but Kevin Brown, for example, is going to West Virginia. Jasir Rogers is going to Oklahoma. Messiah Mickens is going to Oklahoma. I guess that could change, but then Oklahoma's recruiting against Virginia Tech now. They're not at Penn State anymore. And for 2027, do we think Keemon Spell's going to Virginia Tech? Do we really think that's the case? Do we think Khalil Taylor is going to go to Virginia Tech? High-end, borderline, 4-star, 5-star wide receiver out of the Pittsburgh area. No, they're probably not. They're going to end up at Ohio State or Notre Dame. And that's what I mean. VT is a perfect fit for Franklin. It's a weak conference lacking the juggernauts that he's never been able to beat. Virginia Tech would also be thrilled with 8 to 10 wins every year, and that's what you're seeing. It's to each their own. And I have to agree with Franklin because Franklin would always say that a lot of programs would love to be in the position that Penn State is in. 10-2 every year. And that was that a jab directly at Penn State fans or anybody in the media saying that, hey, we expect different or better results? Virginia Tech is singing praises over there. He's going to get us back to 10-2. He's going to get us at the top of the conference. We'll be in contention for conference titles every year. To each their own. Penn State, it's about national titles. For Virginia Tech, it's about conference titles and maybe a Cinderella run in the playoff. That's the difference. James Franklin can give that to Virginia Tech. It wasn't enough at Penn State. And I will continue to side with the fact that James Franklin does not get fired. If he wins just one, chat, he was 0-16 against literally every top matchup, every big game. Penn State did not have a single win since 2017. Notre Dame, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan. When Minnesota got good for a season, had a Cinderella run, they lost. Every single time there was a chance for Penn State to pass, exceed expectations, get into the 4-team playoff, just could never happen. James Franklin had one big game victory over the likes of Ohio State in 2016, and they took a miracle blocked field goal for that to happen. That's what I mean. If he wins any of them, Iowa, when their top 5 matchup against Iowa, couldn't do it. Top matchup against Minnesota to go to the college football playoff. If you win that game right, you finish 11-1, you get in the top 4. Didn't happen. Michigan, any of those times, you were in prime position to upset Michigan a couple of times. Couldn't do it. Ohio State, you were in position to beat those teams multiple times. Couldn't do it. And then Notre Dame. You were one drive away from making it to the college football. Any of those games. Franklin wins one of them. We're not here. This season's a mulligan. But it's not like he was 2-14, 3-13. It was 0-16 in big games since 2017. So let's see what other comments we got here. Yeah, I see people talking about Terry Smith. Will the ACC survive in its current state? Maybe, maybe not. And that doesn't bode well for anybody that's in the ACC. That you just always kind of have to watch that. Eventually, we're just going to get 2 super mega conferences. We'll just get 2 super mega conferences. It'll be the Big Ten and the SEC, and then they'll divide back into divisions, and we'll get somewhat of a semblance of we'll get more of a semblance of what it used to be in the 70s and 80s with, so I don't know my college football history too much, but you'll have what conferences were there? There was the, there's the Southwestern Conference. You'll get the Pac, right? They're going to be in divisions. So that's what I think we're all headed for, is that the ACC and the Big 12 are eventually just going to be absorbed by the Big 10 and the SEC. People are going to get an even cut. You're also having these private settlement deals. Like, is that going to fly across the board? No. The college football, it's eventually going to be the Super College Football League or whatever, and they'll break off from the NCAA, and that's what they want, because then they'll keep a bigger chunk of the pie. I'm not here to debate all the ramifications of that, because there's going to be a lot of consequences from that as well. But we will see some form of college football super league, and you will just get divisions. You'll have the West Coast teams play the West Coast teams, and then you'll have some crossover with the East Coast teams, right? You'll have the regional rivalries again. I've said that I am all for Penn State playing Pitt, but I am also for Penn State playing West Virginia, and Penn State playing Syracuse, and Penn State playing Boston College, and Penn State playing Army and Navy, returning to the historical ties and paying respect to the history of college football. That is what I want. So Pitt isn't any different than West Virginia or Syracuse. I want to have respect to the historical aspects for all those regional rivalries. Virginia Tech can compete right away for next season. But they do have a tough schedule, so that's why I'm eager to watch what they do. I will absolutely be watching Virginia Tech. And it's not a hate watch. It's a respect and observe watch. Because they're going to play Miami of Florida. They're going to play Clemson. And then they'll face, right? I think it's ironic that he'll face Mike Locksley in Maryland. Like, you can't get away from them. That James Madison team, if Bob Chesney is still there, that's going to be a really good James Madison team. You got to face Pat Narduzzi and Pitt. I think it's ironic, right? Oh, and you have to face Bill O'Brien in Boston College. Boston College is not a juggernaut. I know that, but still, come on. You can't escape. James Franklin can't escape it. You got to face a former Penn State coach. You got to face the coach that you wouldn't schedule a home and home with, and Pat Narduzzi. Mike Locksley, who literally called you out and just said, you're a Bush League football coach. All of it. He's got all of it next season at Virginia Tech. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this live edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Like I said, impromptu on a Monday, drive time, and I appreciate you joining me for this episode, hearing this discussion, and we'll see what happens. And we're going to react and analyze it accordingly. Is Penn State, how many Penn State players are going to leave? How many coaches are going to leave? What recruiting battles are going to go down in the short term? And just what coach is Penn State going to get? That's what I'm most concerned about at this point. It's trending to be Eli Drinkwitz. Brent Key still in the mix. Jeff Brohm, he's working on an extension with Louisville. Has it been officially reported? If that's the case, the only coaches that are off the board are Mike Elko, Kurt Cignetti, and Matt Rule. I'm not saying that Penn State wants Matt Rule, but those are the coaches that are actually tangibly off the board. Bob Chesney of James Madison, that's somebody that Penn State is, you know what, we like the way that you operate. You just haven't proved to us a group of five at the group of five. So is Penn State willing to roll the dice there? But as it happens, as it unfolds, we'll break it all down here on Locked On Nittany Lions. So if you're new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And I mean everybody. Football, wrestling, we'll talk recruiting, basketball, hockey. It is all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Thank you so much for joining me on this live show.